Good evening, I'm Cynthia Ng. China's President Xi Jinping is seeking closer ties with Russia, calling it a strategic choice. And in Sudan, the country's warring factions have agreed in principle to a U.S. brokered truce. All that and more coming up on Awani International. China and Russia are deepening their partnership, with President Xi Jinping calling for more investment and cooperation amid a turbulent external environment. Xi made the remarks during a meeting in Beijing with Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin, saying closer ties are a strategic choice for both countries.
In a joint statement, the two nations pledged to strengthen cooperation across energy, agriculture, aerospace, the digital economy, and green development, calling them new engines of growth. Russia also reaffirmed support for China's One China policy and opposition to Taiwan's independence. The two countries signed a no-limits partnership in 2022, just days before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a relationship that has since grown closer as Moscow turns to Beijing to ease the impact of sanctions. But trade between the two has slowed in recent months, with Chinese oil firms halting purchases of Russian crude after the United States sanctioned energy giants Rosneft and Lukoil.
Prosecutors from the International Criminal Court (ICC) say atrocities in Sudan's Darfur region may amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. Investigators are collecting evidence after the Rapid Support Forces (RSF), a paramilitary group fighting Sudanese army, captured El Fasher after besieging it for 18 months.
Since the RSF takeover, reports have emerged of mass killings, sexual violence, looting, and attacks on aid workers in and around the city, where communications remain largely cut off. In a statement on Monday, the ICC said the atrocities are part of a broader pattern of violence that has afflicted the entire Darfur region since April 2023. The World Health Organization says at least 460 people were killed at a hospital and medical staff were abducted. The fall of El Fasher marks a grim new phase in Sudan's two-year conflict. The ICC said both the Sudanese army and the RSF may be responsible for atrocities. The UN said more than 65,000 people have fled since Sunday, but tens of thousands remain trapped.
The Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces (RSF) have agreed in principle to a U.S.-mediated humanitarian truce. Masad Boulos, the U.S. Senior Advisor for Arab and African Affairs, confirmed both sides accepted the initial framework, with Washington now working on the final details.
According to Sudan Tribune, Boulos said the agreement, still under negotiation, aims to establish a 3-month ceasefire to allow aid deliveries and civilian evacuations, followed by a 9-month political process aimed at ending the war. The initiative is part of a framework set by the International Quad, comprising the US, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, back in September. Boulos added that there are no direct negotiations between the two sides, with the US coordinating communications to guide the process. He described conditions in El Fasher, North Darfur, as extremely urgent and dire.
More updates coming your way right after the break.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini. Pastikan Astro Awani menjadi pilihan anda, tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada.
Welcome back. Former U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney, one of the most influential and controversial figures in modern American politics, has died at the age of 84. His family say he passed away Monday night from complications of pneumonia and cardiovascular disease. Cheney, who served as vice president under George W. Bush from 2001 to 2009, was a central figure of the 2003 invasion of Iraq, a decision that shaped U.S. foreign policy for decades. As vice president, Cheney expanded the influence of his office, pushing for greater executive power and defending harsh interrogation practices, later labeled as torture. His political career spanned decades, from serving as Secretary of Defense under President George H.W. Bush during the first Gulf War to leading energy giant Halliburton before returning to politics. Cheney struggled with heart problems for most of his life, suffering his first heart attack at age 37 and undergoing a heart transplant in 2012. A polarizing figure of immense influence, Cheney left behind a legacy that continues to shape U.S. politics, foreign policy, and debates over power and accountability in Washington. The United States is signaling it may give its forces in South Korea more room to respond to threats beyond the Korean Peninsula. During a visit to Seoul, U.S. War Secretary Pete Hegseth said Washington remains focused on deterring nuclear-armed North Korea. But he noted the region is changing and challenges from China and others could influence future deployments.
Hegseth said both sides are discussing defense costs, military cooperation, and whether to broaden the role of the roughly 28,500 American troops stationed in South Korea. South Korea has long resisted any shift in the U.S. military's role beyond the peninsula, focusing instead on strengthening its own capabilities. Hegseth also said U.S. President Donald Trump backed South Korea's plan to develop nuclear-powered submarines, describing it as a part of a push to give allies strong defensive capabilities. South Korea's defense minister, An Gyu-bak, stressed the country remains committed to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and has no intention of pursuing nuclear weapons. Hegseth's visit comes as Washington works to reinforce its alliances across Asia amid China's military rise and North Korea's ongoing missile tests.
China has warned that the Netherlands' seizure of chip maker Nexperia could disrupt the global semiconductor supply chain. Beijing accused the Dutch of acting unilaterally and failing to resolve the dispute. In a statement on Tuesday, Chinese Commerce Ministry said the move could worsen the impact on global supply and called for cooperation to prevent further damage.
The Chinese Commerce Ministry said talks have stalled as both sides struggle to find common ground on the future of Nexperia, a Dutch company owned by China's Wingtech Technology. On September 30, the Netherlands took control of Nexperia, citing national security concerns over its Chinese ownership. Nexperia produces large volumes of basic chips used in cars and industrial electronics, making it a key player in Europe's manufacturing sector. The dispute has already spilled over into trade, with Beijing imposing export restrictions on Nexperia products made in China on October 4, leaving European automakers facing shortages and possible factory shutdowns. While most of Nexperia's chips are produced in Europe, about 70% are packaged in China before global distribution. The White House has also urged Beijing to ensure the resumption of trade from Nexperia's facilities in China, following recent talks between President Donald Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping.
Countries are still working on a United Nations Security Council mandate for an international stabilization force in Gaza. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan says any troop deployments will be decided once a framework is finalized.
Fidan spoke after meeting in Istanbul with ministers from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Jordan, Pakistan, Indonesia, and Turkey to discuss the U.S. brokered ceasefire. The plan could face delays over disputes about its mandate. Key questions include U.S. leadership and whether a timetable for Israel's full withdrawal should be set or tied to Hamas's disarmament. Fidan said Turkey wants Palestinians to take responsibility for their own security and governance after the war. though several steps remain before that can happen. The discussions come as Hamas and Israel continue trading accusations of ceasefire violations, with ongoing violence raising fears for the fragile truce. Israel has also been accused of blocking sufficient aid from reaching civilians. Meanwhile, Israel has returned the bodies of 45 Palestinians to Gaza, bringing the total handed over under the U.S. brokered ceasefire to 270. The exchange follows Hamas returning the remains of 3 hostages, confirmed by Israel as those taken during the October 7 attacks.
China's foreign ministry has dismissed safety concerns raised by Taiwan over next year's APEC summit. Beijing says Taiwan can participate, but only if it follows established practice and respects the One China principle.
APEC is one of the few international bodies that includes Taiwan, though it participates under the name Chinese Taipei to avoid political tensions. Taiwan's president has never attended the meetings. The APEC summit is set to be held in Shenzhen next November amid rising tensions between China and Taiwan. Taiwan's foreign ministry says it has asked Beijing for assurances that its delegates will be treated equally and kept safe during the event. Beijing also protested a recent meeting in South Korea between Taiwan's APEC representative, former Economy Minister Lin Chunyi, and Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. China last hosted the APEC summit in 2014 when cross-strait relations were considerably warmer.
As energy demand surges across Southeast Asia, regional cooperation is more important than ever. At Singapore International Energy Week 2025, experts are pointing to the ASEAN power grid as a key to a more secure and sustainable energy future. Farhana Sheikh reports from Singapore.
I'm reporting from Singapore International Energy Week SEW 2025, where energy security, sustainability, and regional cooperation are at the center of discussions. Now, the ASEAN Power Grid is seen as a key enabler of the region's clean energy transition, designed to connect power systems across borders, improve energy access, and enhance resilience against supply shocks.
If you share your resources, you can delay your infrastructure, like building a power plants, building another transmission network, your grid. Yeah, if you have a strong interconnected system with your neighbors, so those money can reduce the cost of energy in a country like Malaysia. Yeah. And energy security. What will be the cost? If I may ask you, what will be the cost implication to the economy if you have a blackout? Massive, it's huge. So those security costs can be shared among ASEAN members.
Financing the ASEAN power grid remains a key challenge as countries balance national priorities with regional goals. Razib says the approach must be equitable, where every member state benefits fairly from shared infrastructure and resources.
I believe the market will determine the pricing and the cost, and everything has to be fair. So, take example, Laos. We always say Laos is like a battery for the Southeast Asian, for the ASEAN. So, if they were to sell the power to their neighboring countries, they will get whatever the right price for their resources, especially the hydro resources. And Vietnam, they have a lot of wind resources, so they will get the right price. So it's all based on the commercial and the market that we're going to design properly. So to answer to you is yes, it is a thing that we are going to work fairly and open and transparent, to the satisfaction of all ASEAN member states.
As ASEAN looks to meet rising electricity demand and cut reliance on fossil fuels, the power grid could be a game changer if countries can align policies and investment priorities. From Singapore International Energy Week 2025, I'm Farhana Sheikh reporting for Awani International.
That concludes Awani International for tonight. Stay with us as we track the strategies and power shifts shaping the new global order. For more updates, visit international.astroawani.com and follow us on social media. I'm Cynthia Ng. Thank you for watching and good night.